Hello and welcome everybody to a new video from Jörg, Joggler66, Hour of the Truth. It is tonight the 11th of December 2020 and I've come to the table to start the second reading and discussion of the book Vietnam, Why Did We Go? From Avro Manhattan. I just watched the premiere video on my main channel that I recorded already some time ago. And now I come to the table to read the very first part. And as you remember, probably last time we stopped with the reading of the preface. That was the last part of the book. And then after that comes chapter 1, that is called Preliminaries. That is dealing, of course, with World War II, the provisional partition of Vietnam, and the beginning of the Vietnamese conflict. And of course, when you are going to a book reading, you would expect the book to be the book reading to start in the very first beginning, meaning with the very first chapter. Not so with me. I have a little bit different plans, and I can tell you what these plans are. I have a website, or I have two websites that I want to speak about. I don't know about the second one, that's maybe for a little later, but the first one is for today. And that is called Christianity in Vietnam. And therefore, of course, you have to understand when we speak of quote-unquote Christianity, this is always Catholicism that is actually meant. Yeah? But Catholicism usurped the name of Christianity about 1700 years ago with the adoption of Emperor Constantine when he made real Christianity the quote-unquote state religion of the pagan Roman Empire. So when this article speaks of Christianity in Vietnam, it speaks of course of Catholicism in Vietnam. And I go into this paper before because it speaks about the very first time when the Jesuits even came as missionaries to Indochina. It doesn't mean that the land Vietnam or the country Vietnam had already that name. That was in earlier times this was Indochina and other names. But the point is that from the 16th century on, Jesuits, the very first Jesuits, went on missionaries into Asia. And I spoke about that in my German reading of the book of Griesinger, who has made a 2-volume work in the midst of the 19th century on the Jesuit order and their machinations from the beginning until the present time, which was 1866 when he published these books. And there he also goes extensively into the working of the Jesuits in India, in Japan, and in China. And China, of course, that includes Indochina, so that is the part that we know today as Vietnam. And you know, I want to make a reading of that book, Vietnam, Why Did We Go? From Avro Manhattan, but I think it is expedient that we understand history very well and that we understand how the Roman Catholic Church in the first place came to that country and what was the influence and the history of the Catholic Church in that country before it led up to that war of the 20th century that we are speaking about in the book. Because only then we can have a full understanding, because you know this war has of course his preliminaries, means things were going before there, history was made before there. It was an occupation of France most and for all of the time that we are going to read in the book also. And that French occupation was done away with. And we have to understand the French missionaries, we have to understand the Roman Catholic missionaries, and that's why I want to read this little article that is called Christianity in Vietnam. It starts out saying the first Catholic missionaries visited Vietnam from Portugal at the beginning of the 16th century. Well, it's not the beginning of the 16th century, it's when we speak about the Jesuits, of course, the middle of the 16th century, but there were probably also Catholic missionaries earlier there. The earliest missions did not bring very impressive results. Only after the arrival of the Jesuits in the first decades of the 17th century, and as I said already in the beginning, also in the 16th century, from 1655 or something on, did quote-unquote Christianity, did Catholicism begin to establish its positions within the local population. Between 1627 and 1630, Fathers Alexander de Rhodes and Antoine Marquès of the French province converted over 6,000 people. The French missionary priest and bishop of Adrampineau de Behaine, which in Vietnamese speaks Ba Da Loc, played a key role in Vietnamese history towards the end of the 18th century. He had come to southern Vietnam to proselytize, and in 1777 the Thai Son brothers killed the ruling Nguyen lords, and Nguyen An was the youngest member of the family to have survived, and he fled into the Mekong Delta region in the far south, where he met Bishop Pignot, who became his confidant. These bishops become confidants by becoming their, how do you say that, confessionaries. Huh? They become their confessionaries. Bishop Pignot hoped that by playing a substantial role in a Bishop Pignot hoped that by playing a substantial role in a Nguyen An victory, he would be in position to lever important concessions for the Catholic Church in Vietnam, helping its expansion in Southeast Asia. Expansion of the Roman Catholic Church, right? From then on, he became a politician and military strategist. At one stage during the Civil War, the Nguyen were in trouble, so Bishop Pignot was dispatched to seek French aid. He was able to recruit a band of French volunteers. Bishop Pignot and other missionaries acted as business agents for Nguyen An, purchasing munitions and other military supplies. Bishop Pignot also served as a military advisor and de facto foreign minister until his death in 1799. From 1794, Bishop Pignot took part in all campaigns. He organized the defense of Dien Can when it was besieged by a vastly superior Thai Son army in 1794. Upon Bishop Pignot's death, Gia Long's funeral oration described the Frenchman as, quote, the most illustrious foreigner ever to appear at the court of Cochin China. Unquote. Now we are speaking of the early Nguyen dynasty. I'm sorry for my voice here. It's almost leaving me today. By 1802, when Nguyen An conquered all of Vietnam and declared himself Emperor Gia Long, the Roman Catholic Church in Vietnam had 3 dioceses. The Diocese of Eastern North Vietnam with 140,000 members, 41 Vietnam priests, 4 missionary priests and 1 bishop. The Diocese of Western North Vietnam with 120,000 members, 65 Vietnamese priests, 46 missionary priests and 1 bishop. And last but not least, the Diocese of Central and South Vietnam with 60,000 members, 15 Vietnamese priests, 5 missionary priests and also 1 bishop. Gia Long tolerated the Catholic faith of his French allies and permitted unimpeded missionary activities out of respect to his benefactors. The missionary activity was dominated by the Spanish in Tonkin and French in the central and southern regions. At the time of his death, there were 6 European bishops in Vietnam. The population of quote-unquote Christians, speak Catholics, was estimated at 300,000 in Tonkin and 60,000 in Cochin China. The later Nguyen dynasty. The peaceful coexistence of Catholicism alongside the classical Confucian system of Vietnam was not to last. Gia Long himself was Confucian in outlook. As Crown Prince Nguyen Phuc Khanh had already died, it was assumed that Khan's son would succeed Gia Long as emperor, but in 1816 Nguyen Phuc Dam, the son of Gia Long's second wife, was appointed instead. Gia Long chose him for his strong character and his deeply conservative aversion to Westerners, whereas Khan's lineage had converted to Catholicism and were reluctant to maintain their Confucian traditions such as ancestor worship. Li Van Duet and many of the high-ranking mandarins opposed Jia Long's succession plan. Li Van Duet and many of his southern associates tended to be favorable to Catholicism, not Christianity as the article says, and supported the installation of Gian Khan's descendants on the throne. As a result, Li Van Duet was held in high regard by the Catholic community according to the historian Mark MacLeod. Duet was more concerned with military rather than social needs and was thus more interested in maintaining strong relations with Europeans so that he could acquire weapons from them, rather than worrying about the social implications of westernization. Jia Long was aware of the fact that Catholic clergy were opposed to the installation of Min Mang because they favored a Catholic monarch, Khan's son, that would grant them favors. Min Mang began to place restrictions on Catholicism. He enacted, quote, edicts of interdiction of the Catholic religion, unquote, and condemned, quote unquote, Christianity, meaning Catholicism, as a heterodox doctrine. He saw the Catholics as a possible source of division, especially as the missionaries were arriving in Vietnam in ever-increasing numbers. Duet protected Vietnamese Catholic converts and Westerners from Minh Lang's policies by disobeying the emperor's orders. Minh Mang issued an imperial edict that ordered missionaries to leave their areas and move to the imperial city ostensibly because the palace needed translators, but in order to stop the Catholics from proselytizing. To stop the Catholics from proselytizing. Well, Catholics do not really proselytize, they convert. They convert people to their superstitious religious and idolatrous religion, and the problem is that Confucianism and of course later on Buddhism, which are the main religions in Vietnam, are also idolatrous religions, so that's something that they have in common. That's how the Catholics always get in. That is the way they force their way into the countries they want to take over. And Min Mang, as we read already, saw the Catholics as a possible source of division. He understood that they were infiltrating the structure of the country. That's the work Catholics always do wherever they go. They infiltrate. The Jesuits are even the masters of them, but even without the Jesuits, the Catholics do the same thing. They come in, quote-unquote, peacefully with missionaries, and then they proselytize, quote-unquote, proselytize, because they don't proselytize, they convert. They use the things that the religion of the country they go in have in common with their religion, and from there they make on their own traditions and put their traditions, the Catholic traditions, on or over the traditions of the religion in that country. That's how it worked in all these countries in Asia. That's how it worked in Japan for a long time until they were thrown out. That's how it worked in China, and they were never thrown out of China. You have to understand that. The Jesuits entered there in the midst of the 16th century, and they never ever were expelled from China, except of course for the time they were completely quote-unquote forbidden between 1773 and 1814. There they only found refuge in Prussia and in Russia. But that's another case, and that's another discussion. For the rest, they were always there. It's the Jesuits that rule China even today. It's the Jesuits that is not so much spoken about in the book from Avro Manhattan, and that is why I want to go into this here and to tell you a little bit about the history of the Catholics in that country, and well, of course with the Catholics also come always Jesuits. Yeah? This article doesn't mention Jesuits explicitly, but I can assure you that there were Jesuits beneath the quote-unquote Catholic mantle hidden, if you want it like this. And if you read books like Griesinger's work on the Jesuit order, you will understand that. But I cannot put all these things together because we want to read eventually Vietnam, Why Did We Go? It's just that you understand a little bit of the building up of how the Catholics rose to power, how the Catholics managed to get in the beginning of the 19th century 3 dioceses with almost 250,000 people, or with more than 250,000 people in there, 120, 140, and 60,000. That's 260, 320,000, at least 320,000 people that were Catholic in the time there. Spread over all of Vietnam, eastern North Vietnam, western North Vietnam, and central and south Vietnam. Okay, and it is interesting, of course, to see that in North Vietnam you have the highest concentration of Catholics. North Vietnam, wasn't that Ho Chi Minh? Wasn't that communist? That's going to be something interesting when we read Avro Manhattan's book. But just to make sure that you understand, this little history we need to understand before we go into the book. And by the way, when I'm done with this article, I will still not go into chapter 1 of the book. I will start reading this book in chapter 16, which is called Catholic Expansionism in Southeast Asia in the 19th Century. And that's why I chose this article to read in advance, because the book starts in chapter 16 with the Catholics expansionism in Southeast Asia in the 19th century, and this one goes even back to the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, and that's why we're going to start with this, so that we then even better understand what Avro Manhattan is talking about in chapter 16. So let me read this last sentence once again with the proselytizing, and did you understand that Catholics are never proselytizing, they are converting. And when they have the power in the countries, they are not only converting, they put the people to a choice. Convert or die. Now Min Meng issued an imperial edict that ordered missionaries to leave their areas and move to the imperial city, so they couldn't move freely in the country, ostensibly because the palace needed translators, but in order to stop the Catholics from proselytizing. So officially the idea was, we need you as translators, but unofficially the idea behind that was, we just want you to stop making Catholics in our country. Whereas the government officials, the article continues, in central and northern Vietnam complied. Du Yet disobeyed the order and Minh Meng was forced to bide his time. The emperor began to slowly win back the military powers of Du Yet and increased this after his death. Minh Meng ordered the posthumous humiliation of Du Yet. This resulted in the desecration of his tomb, the execution of 16 relatives, and the arrests of his colleagues. Du Yet's son, Le Van Quoy, along with the Southerners who had seen their and Du Yet's power curtailed, revolted against Minh Meng. Quoy declared himself in favor of the restoration of the line of Prince Khan. This choice was designed to obtain the support of Catholic missionaries and Vietnamese Catholics who had been supporting the Catholic line of Prince Khan. Le Van Quoy further promised to protect Catholicism. In 1833, the rebels took over southern Vietnam, with Catholics playing a large role. 2,000 Vietnamese Catholic troops fought under the command of Father Nguyen Van Tam. The rebellion was suppressed after 3 years of fighting. The French missionary quote-unquote father, Joseph Marchand of the Paris Foreign Mission Society, was captured in the siege and had been supporting Quoy, and asked for the help of the Siamese army through communications to his counterpart in Siam, Father Tabert. This revealed the strong Catholic involvement in the revolt. Father Marchand was executed, and that's not the first time that we know that Catholics are involved in a revolt, in a rebellion, in a revolution. They always are. Think of the overthrow they tried to do in good old England in 1605, the Gunpowder Plot. Yeah? Think of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln in your country, the United States of America. That was a plot by the Surratt family, Catholics and Jesuits. This comes over and over again in history. We meet this point. This revealed strong Catholic involvement in the revolt. Therefore, Father Marchant was executed and, of course, made a Roman Catholic saint. I add, because you can be very sure that happened. The failure of the revolt had a disastrous effect on the Catholics, not Christians, of Vietnam. New restrictions against Christians or Catholics followed, and demands were made to find and execute remaining missionaries. Anti-Catholic edicts to this effect were issued by Min Mang in 1836 and 1838. In 1836 through 1837, 6 missionaries were executed: Ignacio Delgado, Domenico Henarez, Jean-Charles Corneille, José Fernandez, François Jacquard, and Bishop Pierre Bory. Now, what about the Church today? After the persecution had ended and the rise of Catholics to power during the turbulent 1960s, Catholic population rose to near 6%. After the Vietnam War ended, that we are going to read about in this book by Avro Manhattan, the population still rose despite a large number of Catholics escaped abroad. Today, even with the lack of financial support and religious tolerance, Catholicism in Vietnam is still growing along with the world's Catholic population, which has reached about 1.157 billion. Pope Benedict XVI created another diocese in southern Vietnam. As for Vietnamese abroad, they contributed to a large increase in Catholics in the United States. According to U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops as of July 2006, 14.9 million people, a 5% of the total U.S. population, are Asian or Asian in combination with one or more other races. 1 million are Pacific Islanders, including Hawaiians, which is 0.3% of total of the US population. Hawaii registers the highest proportion of Asians by state population, which is 56%, followed by California with 14%, New Jersey and Washington with each 8%. Largest Asian U.S. populations are Chinese with 3.6 million, including people from the mainland China, Hong Kong and Taiwan, Filipino for 2.9 million, Indians 2.7, Vietnamese 1.6 million, followed by Korean 1.5, and Japanese with 1.2 million inhabitants in the United States of America. And many of those, of course, are Catholic. The quote-unquote fifth column in the United States of America. So this is a little bit about the early history that we read in the book, or for the book reading, to lay a good foundation of the book reading of Vietnam, Why Did We Go, by Avro Manhattan. And now we are going into the second article that I chose to read in laying a good foundation for the book reading Vietnam, Why Did We Go, which is called The Historiography of the Jesuits in Vietnam. And we are speaking mainly of 2 time frames here. We are speaking of the time between 1615, so that's the beginning of the 17th century, until 1773, and that is, as I just mentioned, the year the Jesuits were expelled from everywhere all over the world because they were quote-unquote abolished by the papal bull Dominus ac Redemptor Noster, and then they were re-established in 1814. So this article looks at the historiography of the Jesuits in Vietnam between 1615 and 1773, and from 1957 through 2007. I don't know if we're going through all the article and especially the latest time, 1957-2007, because we also want to go, of course, into the book reading. But the interesting thing is that this article comes from a Jesuit website. It is written by An Q. Tran, S.J., meaning Sociedad Jesus, who is a Jesuit himself. It is a Jesuit historiography online, and that's where I found this article. And we are going to read in this and see if we are getting anything interesting from this article. Of course, we have to understand here that this article is written by a Jesuit. So he is not going to tell us anything really secret, you know. In contrast to the wealth of information about the Jesuits in China and Japan, and this is what I refer to in the book of Griesinger, the parallel story of the Jesuit presence in Vietnam has received modest scholarly attention until recent decades. Why? Recent decades? We are speaking about the decades of the Vietnam War, eh? Then all of a sudden it became interesting to see what the Jesuits were doing there. That's what the author doesn't tell us, that's what I tell you. Even though the Portuguese and Italian Jesuits were instrumental in establishing Christian, and please, I don't want to repeat myself all through this reading, when I say Christian in an article like this, it is of course Catholic, so I try to change while reading the word Christian, speaking Catholic to make it easy for you to understand, but otherwise, if I do not say explicitly Bible-believing Christians, we are always with Christian and Christianity speaking of Catholics, okay? So even though the Portuguese and Italian Jesuits were instrumental in establishing Catholic communities in both the ancient states of Cochin China and Tonkin, where, as you understand, Cochin China is the southern part of Vietnam and Tonkin is the northern part of Vietnam, that made up the present-day Vietnam, their contribution were not properly acknowledged. Part of the problem is due to the fact that prior to 1945, meaning the end of the Second World War, Vietnam was known to the Western world largely as part of French Indochina, and thus the Vietnamese Catholicism was seen in the same light, as an extension of French Catholicism. And I'm not going into French Catholicism right now, but you have to understand that French Catholicism is a little bit different from Catholicism in Italy or Spain or Portugal, because the French always had problems accepting the Pope as their temporal ruler. They accepted the Pope's spiritual power, they accepted the Pope's spiritual rule, they accepted him as quote-unquote Lord of Lords, but they did not accept him as King of Kings. So the French Catholic Church has a very special history, and therefore you need to do quite different studies than this book alone. You have to go into The Secret History of the Jesuits by Edmund Paris and other books, and of course also Rulers of Evil, because the Americans also have a very special American Catholic Church, which also is different than 100% Tridentine Roman Catholicism. Well, the 100% Tridentine Roman Catholicism is taking over in America right now, but historically the Roman Catholic Church in America is more an American Catholic Church, because also they needed to be developed in a country that was hostile to them. In the beginning of the United States of America, speaking of the end of the 18th century, when America or the United States of America were founded, less than 2% of the population were Catholics and all the rest were Protestants. So in that hostile environment, the Catholics could not put out their idolatrous and superstitious religion as they used to. They had to be more careful to do that, especially when they were manning the governments. They had to be very careful about that. And the very first Jesuit and the very first Roman Catholic diocese in America was founded by what's his name, John Carroll, in 1808. That's why Pope Benedict XVI came over in 2008 to have a celebration of the 200th anniversary of the first Roman Catholic diocese founded by John Carroll, who also was a founder of Georgetown Boys' School, which then later developed into Georgetown University and the renowned Jesuit university that it is today. And this John Carroll and his Catholic clan, let's call them, had of course contact with the Pope in Rome, but they managed to make a quote-unquote deal that the Catholic Church in America did not hold up the ultramontane universal rulership of the Pope, as all over the world that is done by Catholics, because they needed to be very cautious in the United States of America. So in that regard, the American Catholic Church is a, how you can say, is a little bit like the French Catholic Church or French Catholicism, that always was something special, even in Europe. That's why you have had so many wars also and problems between Germany and France in Europe. Yeah, the Germans were called the Holy Roman Empire of German Nation because they were really Roman Catholic, and the French were a little bit more on the looser side, let's say. And that's why there came many conflicts from. So French Catholicism is something different than 100% pure Roman Catholicism, and also American Catholicism is also something in the same regard as French Catholicism. You just have to understand that. So that's why we are reading here in this last sentence, Vietnam was known to the Western world largely as part of French Indochina, and thus an extension of French Catholicism. For 300 years, from the 1660s to the 1960s, the Catholic Church in Vietnam was largely under the care of the Paris Foreign Mission Society, which in French is called Mission Étrangère de Paris, or MEP. It was not under the care of Roman Foreign Mission Society. You understand? It was led by Paris. It was led by the French Catholic Church, not by the Roman Catholic Church out of Rome. Now, the early clashes between the Jesuit Padroado missions and the Propaganda Fide sponsored bishops during the 1660s through 1680s in Annam, which is Vietnam, and in Siam, which is today Thailand, resulted in a cold reception of the Jesuit legacy in Vietnam. Furthermore, after the suppression of the Society in Jesus in 1773, the Jesuits-based parishes were transferred to the jurisdiction of MEP or Dominican priests. MEP, as we just read, the Paris Foreign Mission Society, or Dominican priests. So here the Jesuits were made subject to the Dominicans, where normally that is the other way around. Up until the middle of the 20th century, most researchers on Catholicism in Vietnam relied on the archival materials of MEP, the collections, quote-unquote, Lettres du Tonkin et de la Cochinchine, unquote, of the AMEP. Yeah? The collections of Lettres du Tonkin et de la Cochinchine means letters from Tonkin and the Cochin China, and the occasional French translations of Jesuit travelogues. The story of early Jesuit involvement in the local churches of the 17th and 18th century was either forgotten or retold through the lens of French historians. The only exception was Avignon citizen Alexandre de Rhodes, 1591 through 1660, who was credited with quote-unquote founding Catholicism in Vietnam and quote-unquote inventing the Vietnamese, the alphabet script known as Chu Quoc Nhu, which is in English script of the national language. Most of the writings about Jesuit missions of the pre-suppression period, means before 1773, were penned by the Jesuits on the frontiers through their annual reports, which are also called relations, and memoirs, which were written either in Portuguese, Latin, or Italian. Basic biographical information on the Jesuits in Vietnam during this period, means the time before 1773, could be found in Macau et sua Diocese, Volume 14, and relevant entries in Diccionario Histórico de la Compañía de Jesús. Furthermore, interested readers should consult the Archivum Romanum Societatis Jesu, which is Latin here, Archivum Romanum, which is the Roman archive of the Society of Jesus, Archivum Romanum Societatis Jesu. In Rome, which is the collection Japonica Sinica, the Biblioteca de Ajuda in Lisbon, the collection Jesuitas na Asia, and the Real Academia de la Historia de Madrid in Madrid, the collection Jesuitas. In this survey, I, the author of this article, which is An Q. Tran, a Jesuit himself, will present the Jesuit activities during the 17th and 18th century in the ancient kingdoms of Cochin China and Tonkin. So we understand Cochin China is the southern part of Vietnam and Tonkin is the northern part of Vietnam. Then I will conclude the essay with the present account of the Jesuit missions in Vietnam. So first we're going to speak about the Jesuit mission in Cochin China under Portuguese Padroado between 1615 and 1665. In the 17th century, Vietnam, known to the outside world as Annam, which is Chinese Annan pacified South, existed in two feudal states at war with each other. The northern state, Tonkin, was controlled by the Trin clans, T-R-I-N-H, Trin clans, and the southern state, Cochin China, was under the rule of the Nguyen, N-G-U-Y-E-N. Yeah? So we have two clans, the Trins and the Nguyen's, and we have a historical division of the Tonkin northern part and the Cochin China southern part. It's also something that we have to understand, because when we go into the book Vietnam, Why Did We Go, and we speak about the war of North Vietnam against South Vietnam, or South Vietnam against North Vietnam, we are going into a conflict that has been hundreds of years old. That's something probably nobody ever told you, right? So in the 17th century, Vietnam, known to the outside world as Annam, existed in two feudal states at war with each other. The northern state, Tonkin, was controlled by the Trin clans, and the southern state, which is called Cochin China, was under the rule of the Nguyen. The Jesuit missions to Vietnam were an accident of history. Following the ban of Christianity in Japan by Tokugawa shogunate in 1614, new opportunities were opened for the expelled Jesuits to Southeast Asia. Now, this is something very interesting that you have to understand. The 1614 persecution, the Jesuits in Macau grew from 37 to 96 according to the 1616 catalogue. Yeah? The point that I'm making is the following. The Jesuits had been expelled from Japan in 1614. And when you study the circumstances of that expulsion in 1614, you understand why there were these attacks of the United States after the Second World War on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I'm not going into that right now. You can do your own research in that regard, but that's a long history. So when the Jesuits then were expelled from Japan, they had other countries in Southeast Asia they had to enter into. And via China, they went into Cochin China and, of course, Tonkin and what is called Annam, or what we know today as Vietnam. So by 1600, the Nguyen lords of Cochin China had allowed Chinese and Japanese merchants to set up a small trading post in Phaipho, or Hoi Nam. So interesting, huh? The Nguyen lords of Cochin China had allowed Chinese and Japanese merchants to set up a small trading post. But Japanese merchants were, of course, infiltrated by Portuguese Jesuits in the time already. Now in 1614, Portuguese merchant Fernandes de Costa obtained exclusive permission to trade there. Upon learning of this, Valentim Carvalho, who lived between 1560 and 1631, who was the provincial of Japan, who had just been expelled from Japan along with a large number of Jesuits, decided to send 3 Jesuits to Phaipho to explore the possibility of continuing their mission among the Japanese. Traces of early Western missionaries in Vietnam prior to the Jesuit arrival were faint. According to a legendary account on the Imperial Chronicle, Mirror and Commentary on the History of the Viet. Around 1533, a quote-unquote certain Westerner named Ai Nek Su or Ai Nin Q, maybe we should spell this Ignacio, had secretly introduced the quote-unquote false doctrine of Jesus along the coast of Tonkin. Speaking of 1533, well, that must be something they just heard of because the Jesuits were only founded in 1534. But it's interesting how far that goes back, right? Traces of early Western missionaries in Vietnam prior to the Jesuit arrival were faint, but according to a legendary account in the Imperial Chronicle, around 1533, a quote-unquote certain Westerner named Inexu, which could be spelled Ignacio, had secretly introduced the quote-unquote false doctrine of Jesus along the coasts of Tonkin. So I don't know about 1534, but I know about 20 years later, about 1555, 1556. That's the time we know that the Jesuits went into the realms of Southeast Asia by the Book of Griesinger. In the latter half of the 16th century, Franciscan, Augustinian, and Dominican missionaries from Portuguese Malacca and Macau and Spanish Manila came to evangelize, to convert, in Tonkin and Cochin China. Although their missionary enterprises were short and sporadic, there were records of few converts. Catholicism began to take a firm root in Vietnam with the establishment of the Jesuit mission in the 17th century. The earliest information about the Jesuits in Vietnam were reports from the Anua of the Provincia Iaponai, a territory that encompassed much of East Asia. On January 18, 1615, 3 Jesuits from Macau landed in Qua Han, which is near present-day Hoi An. 2 priests, namely Francesco Busomi, who lived between 1575 and 1639, and Diogo Carvalho, who lived between 1578 and 1624, and several brothers came to visit the Japanese Catholics who had taken refuge in southern Vietnam to escape the persecution led by the Tokugawa shogunate. Tokugawa shogunate, that is Shogun Tokugawa, that is the ruler of Japan in the time, who had expelled the Jesuits from Japan. They fled from Japan into southern Vietnam, Cochin China. These Jesuit missionaries, however, found the Vietnamese receptive for the new religion, and there were 10 baptisms by Easter of 1615. With financial support from an early convert, Busomi was able to build a chapel and a residence there. Encouraged by the initial progress, the Jesuit superior in Macau decided to send more Jesuits to Cochin China. Between 1615 and 1627, 25 Jesuits worked and stayed in Cochin China for periods ranging from a few months to several years. In 1617, Francisco da Pina, who lived between 1585 and 1625, a gifted linguist, and 2 companions arrived in Cochin China. Pina's masterful knowledge of local language allowed him to preach without an interpreter, and he gathered around him a group of young Vietnamese catechists, modeled after the Dojuko lay community of Japan. These assistants helped to act as interpreters and mediators between the missionaries and local population, as well as scribes for missionaries to learn the language. Pina was the pioneer in laying out the foundation for the alphabetization of the Vietnamese language. By 1620 or 1621, with the help of local assistants, he already composed a rough catechism in local Cochin Chinese dialect in southern Vietnamese to meet the need of the Catholic neophytes. He was also credited with the composition of a quote-unquote grammar book of the language, but his works are presumably lost. The Italian Jesuit Cristoforo Borri, who lived between 1583 and 1632, a companion of Pina, used scientific skill to impress the local rulers by accurately predicting the lunar and solar eclipses. Now, that the Jesuits were sent as, or were named as, or famous as astrologers is not new to us. You have to study, therefore, Matteo Ricci, or Matthias Ricci, who went on a journey to China and who was the astrologer of the Chinese emperor in those times. Yeah? So it is nothing new, at least not to me, that the Jesuits were astrologers. And this is what the article continues with. The Italian Jesuit Cristoforo Borri, a companion of Pina, used scientific skill to impress the local rulers by accurately predicting the lunar and solar eclipses. When you can tell the people when these eclipses come, which were much more frightening a few hundred years ago than they are today, you gained power over the people. I hope you understand that. That's what the Jesuits did, you know. He was the first European who told the world about Cochin China in his Relazione della nuova missione degli Pepe della Compagnia di Gesù al Regno della Cochinchina in 1631. That is the work where he put that experience in there. Along with discussion on the land, its flora and fauna, people, cultures and politics, Borri's account of the early Jesuit activities during the years of 1607 to 1621 offered us a picture of the up and down of the Cochin China mission. The first decade of the Jesuit mission of Cochin China was relatively successful. The Jesuits were in favor with the Indian lords, de facto rulers of Cochin China, who were fascinated with their skills in language, mathematics, and astronomy. After some initial difficulty, the Jesuits were allowed to settle in different parts of Cochin China. From their base in Faifo in 1615, the Jesuits spread to Nuoc Man or Pulau Kambi in 1618 and Tan Kiem or Kakiam in 1623. Soon, the Nguyen rulers turned against the new faith. How come, do you think? I mean, this Jesuit author is not telling us very much, right? He's just saying the Nguyen rulers turned against the new faith. Why? Because the Jesuits always, everywhere where they are, act the same way. And that way is that they infiltrate and from the inside, like a cancer, destroy the structures of the country they live in and take over with their structure and take over with their idolatrous and superstitious religion. That's the point. That, of course, is something the author won't tell us because he's a Jesuit himself. But when the Nguyen rulers turned against the quote-unquote new faith, this Catholicism, there has to be a reason. And that is because they, most of the time, made abuse of the power they were given. They sucked the land out of their money, they controlled the people, and they were actually erecting a shadow government. And the people were more listening to the Catholics or the Jesuits in that regard than to their rulers, than the Nguyen rulers. So the Nguyen rulers saw their power diminished by this quote-unquote new faith. And that's why they went against it. That's exactly the same that happened in Japan. That's exactly the same that happened in so many other parts of the world. Here, just the same thing. Soon, the Nguyen rulers turned against the new faith. Opponents accused missionaries, it's opponents, it's not critics, it's not people who see the reality, who see the truth. Opponents accused missionaries of enticing people to abandon the cult of the ancestors, meaning converting them to Catholicism and leaving the traditions of their ancestors. As early as 1629, the Jesuits were expelled from Cochin China, but were later allowed to return when trade with Macau flourished. They always get you via money, right? Nothing changes in this world. It's still the same today. Money rules the world, right? The love of money is the root of all evils, I say. and the Bible says too. However, after some Japanese Catholics in Faifo had assisted his brother in a revolt against him in 1639, Lord Nguyen Phuc Lan, who lived between 1630 or reigned between 1635 and 48, ordered all 7 Jesuits to leave the country. The young Catholic community, now numbering roughly 15,000, was left to fend for themselves. Alexander de Rhodes joined the Cochin China mission between 1624 and 1626 before he was sent to the Tonkin mission and found a way to return in 1640 with a companion, but the opposition was fierce. Rhodes shuttled between Macau and Cochin China 4 times between 1640 and 1645 before finally being deported from the country under threat of death. Years later, he recounted his experience of Cochin China in a work which name I'm not going to read right now. One of his catechists, Andrew of Fu Yen, who lived between who reigned between 1625 and 44, was the proto-martyr of Cochin China, beheaded in front of the Rhodes himself. The martyrdom of Andrew, reported by Rhodes, was the first hagiography of a nascent church, and it became an inspiration for many French missionaries and Vietnamese converts of future generations. For the next 20 years, speaking of 1646 through 1666, less than 10 Jesuits could enter Cochin China, but their activities were limited. Antonio Francisco Cardim's work, which I spare the name now, and Mitrello Sacano's work, which I spare the name too, describe the situation of Cochin China mission in these difficult years. From time to time, the Nguyen lords expelled the missionaries and proscribed the activities of native Christians, meaning Catholics, of course. The coming and going of Jesuit missionaries and the resulting persecutions by local magistrates did not slow down the spread of Catholicism. By this time, the Cochin Chinese dojuku was already institutionalized as, quote, the order of catechists, unquote. Celibate men, celibate, like Roman Catholicism, abstain from marriage, not from sex. Celibate men who dedicated themselves to the task of evangelization and in the absence of the missionaries. The persecutions of Christians in Cochin China, meaning the persecutions of Catholics in Cochin China, gave Jesuits the impetus to explore for new missions in the neighbor kingdoms of Champa and Cambodia, but these missions were very short-lived. After leaving Cochin China, Rhodes returned to Europe to campaign for support for missionary work in Vietnam. Because his progress was slow in Rome, Rhodes went to France in 1653 to begin another campaign among the French clergy. His request of sending bishops to Asia was heard and welcomed with great success among the clergy of Paris. In 1658, Antichrist Pope Alexander VII appointed 3 Frenchmen as apostolic vicars or missionary bishops to Asia. Cochin China was placed under a new apostolic vicariate entrusted to Monsignor Pierre Lambert de la Motte, who lived between 1624 and 1679, a co-founder of the future Foreign Mission Society of Paris, as we already read of, the MEP. With the arrival of the French priests in 1664, the mission in Cochin China was detached, step by step, from the Portuguese padroado system. The arrival of MEP did not result in immediate surrender of the Jesuits. The jurisdiction and authority of Lambert de la Motte was hotly contested by Jesuits on the ground of their superiors in Macau and by Portugal, who refused to accept the legality of the erection of new bishoprics. Then we are speaking about Jesuit mission in Tonkin under Portuguese padroado between 1627 and 1663. Following the example of their confreres in Cochin China, Giuliano Baldinotti, who lived between 1591 and 1631, and the Japanese brother went to Tonkin in March 1626 to explore the possibility of establishing a mission there. They were well received by the ruling lord of Tonkin, Trin Trang, because he wanted to establish trade with the Portuguese. Trade, it's all about money, right? Upon return to Macau, he wrote a favorable report on the situation, so he must have earned quite a lot. That's my assumption. As a result, the Jesuit superior André Palmero decided to dispatch more Jesuits to the Tonkin mission. Among these Jesuits was the famous Apostle of Vietnam, Alexander de Rhodes. He arrived in Cochin China in December of 1624 and learned Vietnamese under Pina. Rhodes made such good progress in language that 18 months later he was recalled to Macau to prepare the new mission of Tonkin. Together with the veteran of Japan mission, Pero Marquez Sr., they sailed from Macau and landed in Tang Hoa province of March 19, 1627. They were also favorably received by Tringang, who was returning from a campaign against Cochin China. He allowed them to settle in the capital, Hanoi, and evangelize. Skillful in Vietnamese, Rhodes' preaching attracted the attention at the court and a handful of converts among the noble families. By the end of 1627 they had baptized more than 1,200 people, among whom were Trin Trang's mother and one of his sisters. In the meantime, two more Jesuits, Gaspardo Amaral and Paulo Saito, arrived with Portuguese traders in July 1629. Now you're probably going to ask yourself, why is he reading all that stuff? What does that have to do with the book Vietnam, Why Did We Go? And I'm going to tell you in a second, because I'm not going to continue very much in this article, but I will link this article in the video and you can read it for yourself. But the thing that we just read, the last sentence, is very interesting, and that is something that we really have to understand. It says, by the end of 1627 they had baptized more than 1,200 people, among who were Trin Trang's mother and one of her sisters. So that is that you see the Jesuits always go from top to bottom. They go top down. In their infiltration, they first get to the courts, they get to the royals, they get to the aristocracy of the country, and they get those people before they even get massive into the lay people. They turn the rulers of the country from their religion into Catholicism. And they do that by gaining their confidence, like appearing there as scholars in mathematics and astronomy and astrology, as we were speaking about, and as you know from Matteo de Ricci, also in China. Yeah? The history is full of these things. And of course, all these superstitious people, they are afraid of an eclipse of the sun or an eclipse of the moon. And when then there comes someone who tells you that will happen that and that night, then you can prepare, or that and that day, then you can prepare, then you can do this, then you can do that. You don't have to be afraid anymore. And when then that quote-unquote prediction comes out, or true at the same moment that they predicted it would, well, wonderful, then they get their confidence, and that's what they want. They want the confidence of the rulers, and by getting the confidence of the rulers, they infiltrate the rulership, and from that they put down their government top down, from top to bottom. That's what Jesuits do. That's what Catholics do. It's always from the top down. It's never from the bottom up. That is Christianity, bottom up. That is democracy, bottom up. But Jesuits and Catholicism is always the other way around. And I think we read enough to understand that this is exactly what they did all through the years, all here in Vietnam, or whatever the country was called in the time, Cochin China, and the other name I just don't come to at the moment now, Tonkin, yeah. the northern part. That is something that we have to understand. And so there is a long relationship of Catholics in that country. First of all, Portuguese Catholics. Then later came the French Catholics with all the specialties I told you about French Catholicism in regarding or in comparison to Portuguese Catholicism, which is pure Roman Catholicism. So there you of course have your you have your quarrels with, and this is something that I really wanted to tell you in the beginning, that there is a long history of Catholicism in the country of Vietnam, and that is the point that I want to end this reading with. Nobody ever told you that there is a long Catholic tradition in Cochin China or Tonkin, meaning the northern part, Tonkin, or the southern part, Cochin China of Vietnam. Nobody ever told you that. Nobody ever told you about the fight of two clans and the infiltration of the Catholics and especially the Jesuits of these clans and they putting them into war. That is something they have done for centuries here in the country of Vietnam. They have also done that for centuries in other places. That's something that we probably know of, but we were not aware of them doing that in Vietnam. And now that we know that, I don't even go any further into this article. I'm going to give you the link to that article in the description of this video. You can read it for yourself, and you can see that this building of understanding of the history of Tonkin and Cochin China, or called Vietnam as we do it, is so important to understand what then Avro Manhattan goes into that book. And next time, in our third reading, we will start in the 16th chapter of that book, on page 131 in the book, called Catholic Expansionism in Southeast Asia in the 19th century. As I now told you about, beginning a little bit of the 15th, we're going to get until the 16th and until the 18th century. And next time we are going back to the book, chapter 16, and then after that we are going to read about chapter 17, which is called Early History of Catholic Power in Siam and China. Then we go into chapter 18, which is called History of Catholic Aggressiveness in Japan. And then after that we go back to the very beginning of the book, chapter 1, which is called Preliminaries. And that's how I am going to read and discuss this book to you, how I'm going to introduce you to that book, and how I always want to ask you to please do your own research, that you get an own severe understanding of the subject matter talked about in these books. I read these books to get you to read these books, because we have to learn to read again. When we read, we use our own understanding. We use our own speed to understand things. And we can go back a sentence. We can go back a paragraph. We can go back a page. Something you cannot do when watching television, right? That's why it is so important to get off that television and get into books again. Start your own thinking, start your own research, and by that understand the world that you live in. And of course, eventually, these studies should lead you to one book, the Bible, the Word of God, where everything that you read in all these other books more or less is already predicted, prophesied. All the prophecies of the Bible have all been fulfilled. Well, there are a few left, but the time is not yet. The time will come. And we have to study history, real history. And when we go into a book like Vietnam, why did we go? I don't only want to read what the author tells us about when they fomented that war in the midst of the 20th century. I want to go to the roots of that conflict. I want to understand the conflict. I can understand the conflict when I see that you have two fighting clans between North and South Vietnam, which were then called North Vietnam Tonkin and South Vietnam Cochin China. It was a historic conflict that was already there, that then the Roman Catholic Church used for its own advantage, because that's what they did. They used the natural conflict that was there in Vietnam for their own gain. And they wanted to turn over the whole country Catholic, throw out the Confucianists, throw out the Buddhists, throw out the Protestants, and make Roman Catholicism the only accepted religion in Vietnam, North and South. And for that they used Jesuits. They used Jesuits in the United States of America, like the Dulles brothers. They used Cardinal Spellman, the American Pope. They used American politicians. They used fear-mongering, and they used the sacrifice of men. Vietnamese and American soldiers sacrificed on the battlefields for, as the Jesuits would call it, ad majorem Dei gloriam, the greater glory of God. But we're not speaking of the God of the Bible here. We are speaking of the little quote-unquote God in Rome, the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist, who is the fomenter of all the wars. And we really want to get to the bottom of this, and that's why I did this reading that maybe is a little bit of superfluous for some people. I don't care. I thought it was interesting. And of course the article continues for a few pages that you can go into and read all that. I'm going to spare you that. Do your own research. Come back next time when we go into chapter 16 of the book, Vietnam, Why Did We Go? And then we're going to learn what Avro Manhattan has to tell us when he speaks of the Catholic expansionism in Southeast Asia in the 19th century. Until then, please read, study, love your Bible. Maranatha.
A false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall not escape. A false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall not escape. God is keeping track of every lie. There is no escape. Proverbs 19:5. I will tell the truth, for God will punish every lie. Proverbs 19:5. A false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall not escape. A false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall not escape.